The emergency ward at St. Augustine General Hospital was no stranger to chaos. Gunshot wounds, car wrecks, overdoses. But nothing prepared the night staff for what rolled through their doors that morning. It was just after dawn when the paramedics burst inside, pushing a gurney that carried a man who looked half dead already. His name was Ethan Cross, 30 years old, still conscious, still screaming, but screaming like fire was devouring him from the inside. Doctors rushed forward, cutting away his shirt to attach 4 lines. And then, they froze. Ethan's skin was blotched, dark patches crawling across his chest like bruises that had been festering for weeks. A stench hit them next, a stench so foul, so rotten, that one orderly gagged and ran to the sink. The smell of death, leaking from a man who was still alive. Ethan clawed at his stomach, eyes wide with terror, his voice cracking as he shouted, "It's inside me. She put it in me. The baby, it's eating me alive." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. No one knew what he meant. But the horror was only beginning. The doctors made an emergency cut to relieve the swelling in his abdomen. And what they saw turned their blood cold. His organs were softening, liquefying, as if they had been decomposing for weeks. Yet Ethan's heart was still pounding, still fighting, refusing to stop. Thick, black blood oozed across the surgical drape, sticky and unnatural. Every attempt to stabilize him only seemed to make the decay spread faster. One resident whispered, trembling, "It's like he's decomposing before he's dead." Panic rippled through the ward. Infectious disease specialists ordered full isolation. Hazmat suits were pulled on. But it was already too late. Ethan's body was collapsing in real time. And through the haze of agony, he kept muttering a single name. Isabella. Isabella Reyes. The woman he had spent the night with. The woman who carried a child. Nurses swore they saw bubbles rise beneath his skin, like gas escaping a corpse. Yet Ethan was still breathing, still pleading for mercy. His screams echoed through the halls, raw, animalistic, so horrifying that his own mother, who had rushed to the hospital, later said, "That wasn't my son's voice, it was the sound of something being slaughtered." Reporters caught wind by noon. Social media exploded with rumors. A man rotting alive after a night with a pregnant woman. Doctors whispered in disbelief. No pathogen could do this in 12 hours. No drug explained the smell of decay clinging to his flesh. And while Ethan's body broke down faster than science could chase, detectives were already circling. This wasn't just a medical mystery anymore. This was the beginning of a nightmare. Before the hospital, before the screaming, before the horror, there was Ethan Cross. To most who knew him, Ethan was unforgettable. At 30 years old, he carried himself with the swagger of a man who thought the world was his playground. By day, he worked odd construction jobs, heavy labor under the Texas sun, enough to pay the bills, but never enough to tie him down. By night, he transformed. In Houston's midtown bars, Ethan was a fixture. The kind of man who slapped every bouncer on the back like an old friend, who greeted every bartender with his trademark grin, and who could slip into conversations as if he'd known strangers for years. He lived for neon lights, for the pulse of music, for the chase. And oh, how he loved the chase. For Ethan, intimacy was never about love. It was about conquest. He bragged to his friends that he measured his nights not by drinks, but by how many phone numbers he collected. Women described him as charming, magnetic, even addictive, but also reckless, selfish, and dangerous. He was the kind of man who could make you feel like you were the only person in the world, until the morning after, when you realized you were just another story in his ever-growing list. Still, behind the confidence, there was something else. Something hollow. Ethan's father had died when he was just a teenager, a blow that left him adrift. His mother, Linda, worked 2 jobs, struggling to keep food on the table. Ethan learned early that life was fleeting, unpredictable, and instead of slowing down, he sped up. He drowned that emptiness in parties, in hookups, in nights that blurred into mornings. Friends said Ethan was fun but wild. The kind of guy you wanted at a party, but never in your family. To his buddies, he was a thrill. To parents, he was a warning. But deep inside, Ethan was tired. Nights of endless flirting and faceless encounters began to blur into sameness. Each morning after felt heavier than the last. He laughed it off, telling friends he was living life with no breaks. Yet sometimes, alone in his apartment, Silence pressed down on him. He drank to drown it out, picked up strangers to forget it. But it always came back. That's what made him reckless. That hunger. That emptiness. He wasn't chasing women. He was chasing distraction. And distraction found him. On a humid summer night, Ethan walked into Club Sombra, one of his usual haunts. He expected the same routine. Music, shots, easy company. But what he found that night would change everything. She was sitting alone at the bar. A woman who didn't belong there, but who owned the room the second she walked in. She wasn't dressed for attention. No glitter, no sequins. Just simple black, her long dark hair spilling over her shoulders. And yet, no one could look away. She was 7 months pregnant. Her belly unmistakable, round, almost glowing under the neon lights. Pregnant women didn't haunt bars at midnight. And yet here she was, calm, composed, drinking nothing stronger than club soda with lime. Her name was Isabella Reyes. Ethan noticed her the way a predator notices prey. But what he didn't realize was that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't the predator. He was the one being drawn in. And as he locked eyes with Isabella across that crowded bar, Ethan Cross's fate was sealed. She didn't belong there. And yet, she owned the room. When Isabella Reyes walked into Club Sombra, conversations dipped, eyes followed, and whispers stirred like ripples across water. It wasn't glamour that drew attention. It wasn't sequins, lipstick, or glitter. It was something far more unsettling, contradiction. She was beautiful, yes, striking in her own way. Long black hair framed a pale, calm face. Her posture was straight, unflinching, almost regal. And yet the most undeniable thing about her was her swollen belly. Isabella was heavily pregnant, 7 months, at least. A child growing inside her, visible to everyone in that dim neon bar. Pregnant women didn't sit alone at midnight bars. Pregnant women didn't sip soda water with lime while men around them drowned in whiskey. And yet, here she was. Not hiding, not uncomfortable, not even defensive. She looked as though she had every right to be there, and dared anyone to question it. Patrons stared, but not for long. Because the longer you looked, the less you saw the belly, and the more you noticed her eyes. Sharp, dark, unblinking. Eyes that seemed to study people, dissect them. Eyes that didn't soften with laughter or dim with fatigue. They were steady, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. Rumors swirled quickly. Who was she? A runaway wife? A woman escaping a violent past? A lost soul with nowhere else to go? But none of the whispers fit. Isabella wasn't lost. She wasn't afraid. She carried herself like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And when Ethan Cross noticed her, he was hooked. To Ethan, mystery was irresistible. And Isabella was mystery incarnate. He slid up to the bar with his signature grin, leaning close enough for her to hear him over the music. His lines, polished by countless nights, usually worked. A joke here, a compliment there, a playful nudge. But Isabella didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't push him away. She just watched. Silent. Steady. Ethan joked about her being out so late, gestured at her belly, teased that she must have a wild story to tell. Isabella tilted her head, her voice low, steady, deliberate. Not every child is meant to be born, she said. Some of us carry life for different reasons. The words hit him like ice water. Strange. Ominous. But Ethan, reckless as ever, just smirked and leaned closer. Well, I'm not afraid of a little complication. Her lips curved. Not quite a smile. You should be. That should have been his warning. That should have been the moment he walked away. But Ethan Cross never walked away from a challenge. And Isabella Reyes was the ultimate challenge. He bought her another soda. She let him. He brushed her arm as he handed it over. She didn't flinch. He asked questions, she answered none. Instead, she let him circle her like a moth around flame. Never inviting, never rejecting. Just waiting. And when she finally stood, nodding toward the door, Ethan's heart leapt. She didn't need to beckon. She didn't need to seduce. She had already chosen him. Outside, the humid Houston night pressed against them. Neon lights faded into shadows. Isabella walked slowly, steadily, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Ethan trailed half a step behind, his pulse racing. He thought he was chasing her. But in truth, he was being led. Into the dark. Into the unknown. Into the night that would end his life. Ethan thought he was in control. He always did. But that night, he wasn't leading. He was being led. Isabella Reyes walked out of Club Sombra without a word, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly, her pace unhurried. Ethan followed like a moth drawn helplessly toward a flame. The humid Houston air clung to his skin, thick with the smell of gasoline and fried food drifting from late-night trucks. Yet all he noticed was her. She didn't flirt. She didn't glance back. She didn't even speak. But every step she took seemed to pull him deeper under her spell. At the motel, Ethan swaggered to the counter, sliding his credit card across like this was just another conquest. But deep down, his heart was pounding louder than he wanted to admit. Something about her unsettled him. Something about her silence, her calmness, felt unnatural. In the elevator, he leaned against the mirrored wall, flashing his usual grin, but Isabella's eyes never met his. They stayed fixed on the glowing floor numbers. The cables groaned. The seconds stretched. Ethan's jokes died in his throat. He told himself it was excitement. But beneath that thrill was something else, fear. Inside the room, he fumbled with the key card, tossed his jacket on the chair, tried to set the mood. Dim lights, closed curtains, the usual ritual. Isabella, however, moved with deliberate certainty. She placed her purse neatly on the dresser, then turned to face him, her silhouette framed against the faint glow of the city outside. Her voice broke the silence. "You think pregnancy makes me fragile?" Ethan chuckled, gesturing awkwardly at her belly. "I mean, no judgment, but this is a little unusual, don't you think?" Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "This child isn't here to live," she said softly. "He's here to take." The words crawled across his skin like ice. He forced a laugh, pretending not to feel the chill. "Well, lucky me then. Guess I'm on the menu tonight." She stepped closer. Her hand glided across the curve of her belly, her eyes unblinking. "Lucky," she whispered, "is not the word I'd use." For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like prey, but bravado was his armor. He reached for her waist, and she let him. Her skin was warm, almost feverish. When he kissed her, she didn't melt into him the way others did. She absorbed him, drew him in with a force that felt less like passion and more like inevitability. Their bodies tangled on the hotel bed, the sheets twisted beneath them. Outside, city lights flickered through the blinds. Ethan's nerves screamed with intensity, each touch sharper, each sensation overwhelming. Pleasure blurred into pain. Every nerve stretched taut, like strings about to snap. And then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. At first, faint, a whisper, a muffled cry, like a child weeping under layers of water. Ethan froze, heart hammering. What the hell was that? Isabella pressed her palm against his chest, her gaze unblinking. "Don't stop," she whispered. "He's listening." His blood ran cold. He wanted to ask who. He wanted to pull away. But her voice bound him tighter than her body ever could. Against his will, he obeyed. When it was over, Ethan collapsed beside her, sweat pouring down his temples, his chest heaving. But Isabella didn't move. She lay perfectly still, one hand resting on her belly, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The silence stretched too long. Ethan forced a nervous laugh. "So, you going to tell me what that was all about?" Her head turned slowly, her gaze locking onto his. "Every man thinks he's in control," she murmured. "But you gave yourself away tonight. And now you're his." Ethan swallowed hard. "Whose?" Her finger pressed against his lips, silencing him. "Sleep. You'll understand soon enough." Her calm terrified him more than any outburst could have. He stared at her in the dim light, waiting for her to drift into slumber. But she never closed her eyes. She just lay there, breathing steadily, one hand circling her belly like she was cradling something far more sinister than a child. Eventually, exhaustion dragged Ethan under. But his last thought before the darkness came was not of desire, not even of triumph. It was fear, a gnawing dread that he hadn't just spent the night with a woman. He had spent it with something else. When he awoke hours later, the bed was cold. Isabella was gone. Her purse, her shoes, her presence, vanished. The only thing she left behind was a faint metallic smell. Rust, earth, death. Ethan rubbed his temples, telling himself she'd slipped out early, that he'd see her again, that it was just another story for his collection. But then it hit him, a twisting pain deep in his stomach, a nausea so violent it doubled him over. Ethan stumbled to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and froze when he saw his reflection. the whites of his eyes tinged yellow, his skin blotched with dark shadows. The night with Isabella Reyes was over, but the horror she left inside him had just begun. At first, Ethan told himself it was just a hangover. Too much booze, too little sleep, another reckless night catching up to him. But this was different. The twisting pain in his stomach didn't fade. It sharpened, grinding like knives. His head swam, his skin drenched in sweat. He staggered toward the bathroom mirror, bracing himself on the counter, and froze. The man staring back at him wasn't the Ethan Cross he knew the night before. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites tinged yellow. His lips were cracked and gray. His skin was pale, blotched with dark, shadowy patches crawling up his neck and chest. And then he saw it. Tiny bubbles rising under the surface of his skin, like gas escaping from meat left in the sun. He gagged, bent over the sink, and vomited. The bile that splattered was thick, black, streaked with tissue that looked like rotting flesh. Panic took over. Ethan fumbled for his phone, hands shaking so hard he could barely dial. His voice cracked as he croaked into the receiver. "Help me, it's inside me. The baby, it's inside me." By the time paramedics arrived, Ethan was sprawled on the floor, clutching his stomach, convulsing in agony. The stench hit them before they even touched him. Sour, putrid, like a corpse pulled from a swamp. One medic muttered, "Christ, he smells like a dead body." They rushed him to St. Augustine General Hospital, sirens screaming through Houston streets. But no machine, no drug, no human hand could keep pace with what was happening inside him. The hospital horror. Doctors thought it was an overdose. Maybe poisoning. Some new designer drug ripping him apart. They pumped him with fluids, antibiotics, antivirals. Nothing worked. His blood tests came back wrong. White blood cells crashing, liver enzymes spiking, blood turning thick and sluggish. His skin blackened in patches, sloughing off in strips. And the smell? Oh, the smell. Nurses gagged through their masks. The odor clung to the air like death itself. By the 6th hour, Ethan was still conscious. Still screaming. Still begging. He clutched the wrist of a young nurse, eyes wide with terror, teeth chattering. "Cut it out. Whatever she put in me, cut it out." The nurse recoiled, shaken, but later told detectives she had seen his stomach twitch, like something shifting beneath his skin. She swore she heard a faint, muffled cry when the room went quiet. But no one believed her. Doctors whispered furiously in the hallway. Flesh-eating bacteria? A chemical weapon? Some unknown pathogen? But every test came back blank. No toxins. No infections. No explanation. It was as if Ethan's body had simply decided to decompose while he was still alive. The mother's arrival. By the 10th hour, his mother, Linda Cross, was allowed into the isolation ward. The sight broke her. Her son's once handsome face had collapsed inward. Cheeks hollow, lips cracked and gray, eyes sunken and bloodshot. His skin sagged like wax melting under flame. She gasped, her knees buckling. "Oh my God, Ethan, my baby." Ethan reached for her with skeletal fingers, his nails blue, his voice barely a rasp. "Mom," she wasn't human. "Isabella, the baby, it's feeding on me." Black blood trickled from his nose onto the pillow. Linda sobbed, clutching his trembling hand, begging the doctors to do something. But they had no answers. No treatments. Nothing. The infectious disease team whispered about contagion. Security sealed off the wing. Reporters crowded the parking lot, tipped off by rumors that a man inside was rotting alive. Inside that sterile room, surrounded by blinking machines, Ethan Cross was living through the unimaginable, conscious, aware, and slowly decomposing from the inside out. The breaking point. By the 12th hour, his screams had broken into hoarse, animalistic wails. His voice cracked, his tongue itself beginning to decay. His words slurred, but his meaning was clear. "It's inside me. He wants me. He's taking me, piece by piece." A patch of skin on his arm split open, releasing a foul-smelling black fluid that spattered across the sheets. Nurses recoiled in horror as Ethan shrieked, thrashing until orderlies pinned him down. His mother turned away, sobbing into her hands. Machines beeped frantically. His pulse skipped, stuttered, slowed. Yet Ethan refused to slip away. His body was collapsing, but his mind was still trapped inside the cage of his dying flesh. At the 14th hour, his breathing turned ragged. Every inhale rattled, every exhale weaker than the last. His chest rose and fell under invisible weight. And still, he fought to speak. Sophia, he cried suddenly, not Isabella. A different name. A name the doctors didn't understand. Take it out of me. His eyes rolled white, his body convulsed, and then silence. Flatline. The monitor's shrill tone filled the room as his mother wailed, throwing herself across his body. But even in death, the horror didn't end. Aftermath of a curse. As doctors stepped back, defeated, they noticed something horrifying. Even after the monitors went quiet, Ethan's body kept changing. His skin sagged, his face collapsed further inward, his frame caved in as though decades of decay were happening in minutes. Nurses whispered to each other that they weren't watching a man die. They were watching a corpse rot in real time. By the time Ethan's body was sealed for the morgue, some staff refused to even write cause of death on his chart. The medical examiner hesitated, pen hovering, before muttering, "Undetermined." Because how could anyone explain this? A healthy 30-year-old man, who rotted alive within 16 hours of leaving a bar with a pregnant stranger. Ethan Cross was gone, his body a husk. His final words burned into the memories of everyone who heard them. The baby, she put it in me. But this wasn't just a tragedy. This wasn't just a medical anomaly. This was the opening act of a nightmare. By the time Ethan Cross drew his last tortured breath, the case had already shifted out of the hospital and into the hands of law enforcement. This wasn't just a medical mystery anymore. It was a crime. The Houston Police Department assigned the case to Detective Gabriel Torres, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for chasing the bizarre. He had seen murders, accidents, even cartel violence spill over the border. But nothing in his long career prepared him for the horror waiting at St. Augustine General. Torres stood outside Ethan's isolation room, the glass barrier fogging with the stench of decay that clung even after death. Through the glass, he saw what was left of Ethan, a man who looked decades older than his 30 years, his skin shriveled, his face collapsed inward like a time-lapse of decomposition. He listened carefully to Ethan's final words, recorded by nurses and echoed in the sobs of his mother. "Isabella, the baby, she put it in me." To Torres, that wasn't delirium. That was a clue. Retracing Ethan's final night. The first step was simple. Retrace Ethan's last 24 hours. His phone records, his text messages, his credit card trail, all led to Club Sombra. Witnesses were easy to find. Bartenders, patrons, even the bouncers remembered Ethan that night. But they remembered someone else, too. A woman. Pregnant. Striking. Silent. She ordered soda water with lime, one bartender recalled. Didn't touch alcohol. Just sat there like she was waiting for something or someone. Another patron swore. She didn't belong there. But she didn't look lost either. She looked like she knew exactly what she was doing. The bouncer, a man who rarely noticed faces in the sea of drunks, remembered her vividly. 7 months pregnant. Dark hair. Calm eyes. She wasn't drunk, wasn't even tipsy. Just steady. Creepy steady. And then the surveillance footage sealed it. The grainy timestamp showed Ethan leaning in at the bar, flashing his grin, trying to charm her. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She just stared. Minutes later, she stood. Ethan followed. At 1:02 a.m., cameras caught them leaving together. At 1:17 a.m., a taxi dropped them at a roadside motel. By dawn, she had vanished. The motel ghost. Torres drove straight to the motel, a rundown building that smelled of mildew and cheap perfume. The receptionist swore he remembered Ethan, a cocky young man flashing a credit card at check-in. But the woman? The clerk shook his head. She didn't sign anything. Didn't show ID. She just walked in with him. By sunrise, gone. No name. No record. No trace. It was as if Isabella Reyes had slipped into the room from thin air and vanished back into it. The first break. But Torres was relentless. He canvassed the area, asking anyone who might have seen her. And slowly, a name surfaced. Isabella Reyes. That's what she told the bartender at Club Sombra. That's what someone heard Ethan call her as they left. A name, flimsy as smoke, but it was enough. Torres ran it through every system he had access to. DMV, immigration, rental agreements, phone contracts. Nothing solid. A passport, yes, issued years earlier in Tijuana, Mexico. But the photo was blurred, the history fractured. She drifted across the border multiple times, never staying long, never leaving a clear trail. No job records. No family. No friends. She was a ghost in the system. Patterns of death. And then came the strangest discovery. Torres reached out to contacts in Mexico, small-town police chiefs, border patrol agents, even local journalists. When he mentioned the name Isabella Reyes, the reaction was always the same. Silence. Then whispers. Whispers of men found dead. Bodies decomposed beyond recognition. And always, before the death, a pregnant woman. Torres pulled unsolved case files from border towns, each more disturbing than the last. In Ciudad Juarez, a truck driver collapsed 12 hours after leaving a cantina with a mysterious pregnant woman. His body was so decomposed the medical examiner refused to sign the certificate. In Monterrey, a young teacher was found in his apartment, skin blackened, eyes sunken, neighbors recalling a dark-haired pregnant woman on the stairs the night before. In Tijuana, 2 college students died within days of each other, both last seen leaving bars with the same description. A woman, mid-20s, always pregnant, always drinking soda water with lime. Torres spread the photos across his desk. The pattern was undeniable. Ethan Cross wasn't the first. He was simply the first in Houston. The detective's dilemma. Back in Houston, Torres felt the weight pressing on him. His colleagues shook their heads, muttering about cult rumors, about urban legends gone wild. But Torres had seen enough death to know when a pattern was real. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the blurred passport photo of Isabella Reyes. Her eyes, though out of focus, seemed to bore into him. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. Somewhere out there, a woman was walking free. Always pregnant. Always 7 months along. And every man who touched her ended up in a morgue. For Torres, one thing became clear. Ethan's death wasn't a freak accident. It was part of something far, far darker. And he was only just beginning to uncover the truth. Detective Gabriel Torres had chased killers before. Cartel hitmen. Domestic murderers. Predators who hid behind masks of normalcy. But Isabella Reyes, she was different. The deeper he dug, the stranger the trail became. Through phone calls to contacts in Mexico, Torres learned her name wasn't just a ghost in bureaucratic files. It was a whisper in police stations. A rumor in cantinas. A curse in border towns. Everywhere Isabella appeared, men died. Not shot. Not stabbed. Not poisoned. They decomposed. Alive. La Obra Negra. The breakthrough came from a weary officer in Baja California. When Torres asked about Isabella, the man leaned closer, lowering his voice. She's been linked to La Obra Negra. Torres frowned. The black work. The officer nodded, his eyes heavy. A sect. Not the usual Santa Muerte devotees you see on street shrines. This is darker. Twisted. They believe pregnancy is a vessel for power. Women carry children they never intend to deliver. Ritual pregnancies, designed not for life, but for death. Torres scoffed at first. Superstition. Old ghost stories. But the officer wasn't finished. The unborn child, he whispered, feeds. Every man who lies with the mother gives his life away. Piece by piece. Until nothing remains. It sounded insane. Impossible. Yet as Torres replayed Ethan's final hours in his mind, the black blood, the rotting flesh, the desperate cries about the baby inside him, the pieces began to fall into place. A trail of the damned. Old case files told the same story again and again. Ciudad Juarez, 2019. A man in his 30s, found slumped over the wheel of his truck. Body decomposed so badly authorities thought he'd been dead for weeks. Witnesses swore they saw him leave a bar with a pregnant woman the night before. Monterrey, 2020. A schoolteacher discovered in his apartment, flesh blackened, eyes hollow. His neighbors described a heavily pregnant woman climbing the stairs with him, calm and silent. Tijuana, 2021. 2 young men, separate incidents, both dead within hours of meeting the same woman. Both bodies collapsed into ruin. Both last seen with her, Isabella Reyes. Torres pinned their photos to a corkboard in his office. Victim after victim. Decomposition after decomposition. Always fast. Always unexplained. Always with her. And in every case, Isabella was pregnant. Always 7 months along. Never 8. Never 9. Always swollen with life. Yet never delivering it. Whispers in the dark. Journalists in Mexico told Torres that locals had a name for her. La Madre de la Sombra. The Mother of Shadows. She was said to walk between bars and cantinas, sipping soda water, her belly round, her gaze steady. Men followed her, entranced, and within a day they were gone. Their bodies wasted, their lives erased. Some swore she was part of the cult. Others claimed she was the cult, its living, breathing ritual. But the most unsettling stories came from families of the dead. One mother said her son's last words were about a baby crawling under his skin. Another swore she woke at night to hear an infant crying in her house, even though her son had died childless. The legend spread like wildfire. Isabella wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a curse, a living omen of death. Torres's doubt. Detective Torres struggled to reconcile what he heard. He was a man of law, of evidence. And yet here he was, listening to tales of unborn children feeding on men, of women cursed to carry pregnancies that never ended. He tried to frame it in rational terms. Maybe Isabella was part of a network using exotic toxins. Maybe the cult was real, but the rituals were symbolic cover for something chemical, something biological. But toxicology reports remained blank. Medical science gave him nothing. And when he remembered Ethan's body, the bubbling skin, the black blood, the way he rotted alive while still begging for mercy, the rational explanations fell apart. Something else was at work here. Something no autopsy could write down. The Black Widow of pregnancy. Back in Houston, the media got hold of the story. The narrative exploded overnight. Headlines screamed, "Houston man rots alive after night with pregnant woman." Talk shows debated whether Isabella was a serial killer or something supernatural. Podcasts dissected Ethan's final words, spreading theories to millions. And then, the name stuck. The Black Widow of pregnancy. It was the kind of name that burned itself into public imagination. Terrifying. Unforgettable. For Detective Torres, it was more than a nickname. It was a warning. Isabella Reyes wasn't just a suspect. She was a legend in the making. A legend that left bodies in her wake. And unless he stopped her, Ethan Cross would not be the last. It began as a whisper in the hospital halls. By the time Ethan Cross was lowered into the morgue, it had become a storm. The media smelled blood, and not just the kind staining Ethan's bedsheets. They wanted headlines. They wanted horror. And Ethan's death was tailor-made for both. The headline that hooked the nation. Houston man rots alive after night with pregnant woman. That was the headline splashed across local news the very next morning. By noon, tabloids ran with even more grotesque versions. Rotting man names his killer before death. Pregnant woman vanishes after turning lover into corpse. The Black Widow of pregnancy. Killer or curse. On television, anchors spoke in hushed, dramatic tones, replaying Ethan's timeline again and again. The bar, the motel, the hospital screams. They repeated his final words like scripture. She put it in me. The baby. It's eating me alive. And the world listened. Social media's firestorm. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, forums. The story spread faster than wildfire. Hashtag rotting alive. Hashtag pregnant killer. Hashtag Black Widow. Memes twisted the tragedy into dark jokes. Conspiracy channels uploaded shaky videos claiming Isabella was a demon, an alien, a government experiment gone rogue. Some swore they'd seen her in different cities, sipping soda water with lime. Others claimed she was immortal, doomed to carry an unborn child forever. The truth didn't matter anymore. The legend had escaped into the world. The mother's agony. For Linda Cross, the frenzy was a second death. She buried her son in a closed casket, not because she wanted to, but because there was nothing left of him worth showing. Cameras flashed as she left the funeral home, microphones shoved into her face, reporters demanding answers she didn't have. Days later, she appeared on live television. Tears streaked her face as she begged, "Isabella, if you are human, if you have a soul, explain why my son had to die." Her voice cracked, her grief raw and unfiltered. Across the country, millions watched a mother's pain spill across their screens. Some pitied her. Some turned her words into sound bites. But for Linda, it was simple. Her son was gone. And somewhere out there, the woman who took him was still free. Experts and charlatans. Talk shows filled their couches with experts. Doctors, psychologists, even priests. They debated whether a fetus could release toxins, whether Isabella was mentally ill, whether she was a witch. None of them agreed. But none of them dismissed the horror of Ethan's death either. And in that vacuum of certainty, charlatans thrived. Online cults adopted Isabella as a symbol. Fringe groups painted murals of a pregnant woman with hollow eyes, calling her the bride of decay. Others warned young men to avoid strangers in bars, whispering urban legends like cautionary tales. Never sleep with a pregnant stranger. If she orders soda water with lime, run. Detective Torres's frustration. Meanwhile, Detective Gabriel Torres watched the circus unfold with clenched fists. The frenzy made his job harder. Every tip line was clogged with hoaxes. Every barfly who'd once seen a pregnant woman thought they had found Isabella. But Torres couldn't stop the media, couldn't stop the legend. All he had was a blurred passport, a string of dead men, and a trail that vanished every time he came close. The legend is born. By the end of the week, Isabella Reyes was no longer a suspect. She was a story, the Black Widow of pregnancy, a name spoken with fear, fascination, and morbid curiosity. To the grieving, she was a murderer. To conspiracy theorists, she was proof of the supernatural. To the internet, she was a viral monster, a digital ghost story told in hashtags and shaky cell phone videos. And somewhere out there, Isabella was still walking free, still pregnant, still waiting. The story should have ended with Ethan Cross's death, a medical anomaly, a strange, tragic one-off. But it didn't. It couldn't, because Isabella Reyes was still out there. Sightings and whispers. Weeks after Ethan's funeral, whispers began trickling in. A rideshare driver swore he picked up a young pregnant woman outside Houston's medical center the very night Ethan died. She slipped into his back seat, ordered nothing but silence, and vanished into the shadows when he dropped her off. When he turned to clean his car later, he found a faint metallic odor that clung to the upholstery for days. In Galveston, a bartender said she ordered club soda with lime, smiled faintly, and disappeared when he looked away. Across the border in Reynosa, a truck stop cashier told police of a pregnant woman who asked for water in the middle of the night. She whispered, "He'll be mine by morning," before leaving with a man in a baseball cap. The next day, that man was found slumped over his steering wheel, body decomposed beyond recognition. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trace. Only the same story, told again and again. Fear turns into folklore. In Houston, Club Sombra never recovered. Students dared each other to sit at the bar, waiting for the woman with soda and lime. None saw her, but the fear itself was enough. Within a year, the bar shut down. Locals whispered it was cursed ground. On forums and podcasts, Isabella became folklore. Parents warned their sons, never chase a stranger in the night. Never touch the woman with the swollen belly. In border towns, she became a ghost story told by truckers around campfires. They called her La Madre de la Sombra, the mother of shadows. To some, she was a demon. To others, a cursed woman trapped in an endless pregnancy. To all, she was death. The detective's obsession. For Detective Gabriel Torres, the case didn't fade with the headlines. It consumed him. His office became a shrine of obsession. Grainy surveillance stills, unsolved case files, maps with pins stretching from Houston to Tijuana. Victim photos stared back at him each night, their hollow eyes demanding answers he couldn't give. Every new rumor, every sighting, Torres chased. But every trail ended the same way, nowhere. He confided once to a colleague over whiskey. "She's not just missing. She's untouchable." Because what could he do? Issue a warrant for a ghost? Arrest a woman whose crimes left no evidence? And yet, Torres knew in his gut this wasn't over. He had studied her pattern. Isabella never stayed hidden for long. She resurfaced when she was ready. Always pregnant. Always waiting. Always choosing her next victim with the inevitability of a storm rolling in. A legend without borders. Months passed. Then a year. A tourist in Tijuana snapped a photo of a mural sprayed across a crumbling wall. A skeletal saint cradling a swollen belly, her eye sockets glowing red. Beneath it, in dripping paint, were the words, "La Madre Nunca de Vida. Solo toma." The mother never gives life. She only takes. The image went viral. Commenters swore it was Isabella herself, immortalized by those who worshipped her. Others claimed it was proof the cult was alive, thriving, and waiting for the next offering. Whether in Houston, Monterey, or the deserts of Baja California, the legend spread. Isabella was no longer just a suspect. She was everywhere and nowhere. Ethan Cross was not the first man to die this way. And as long as Isabella Reyes walked free, he would not be the last. The file on Ethan Cross closed with a single, unsatisfying word: undetermined. No cause of death. No pathogen. No poison. Just a 30-year-old man who had lived fast, died screaming, and decomposed before he was even gone. In the sterile world of medicine, doctors buried his case in silence, embarrassed by what they couldn't explain. In the halls of law enforcement, detectives whispered about it, but never wrote it down. And yet, outside those walls, the story lived on. It refused to fade. The aftermath of horror. For Linda Cross, life became unbearable. She buried her son in a closed casket, his once bright smile reduced to a fading memory in photographs. Cameras caught her weeping on her porch, muttering prayers not just for Ethan's soul, but for Isabella's. Sometimes, she admitted, she woke in the night to the sound of a baby crying in Ethan's old room. She'd opened the door to find it empty, the air heavy with that same sour stench she remembered from the hospital. Grief had turned into haunting. The world makes a monster. Meanwhile, the world twisted Ethan's tragedy into spectacle. Documentaries dissected his final hours. Podcasts obsessed over his dying words. Late-night hosts made grotesque jokes, while conspiracy forums elevated Isabella Reyes into something larger than life. To some, she was a murderer. To others, she was proof of forces science could never tame. And in Mexico, her image spread like wildfire. Murals painted her belly round, her eyes hollow, her figure half saint, half demon. Some prayed to her for protection. Others whispered her name like a curse. The Black Widow of Pregnancy. Detective Torres's quiet truth. Detective Gabriel Torres never stopped thinking about her. Even after the case went cold, he kept a folder of printouts, still frames of Isabella in bars, reports of men decomposed in border towns, anonymous tips of sightings in deserts and motels. Each lead ended the same way. Nothing. Over whiskey. He once told a colleague the truth no report would ever print. Jason wasn't poisoned. He wasn't diseased. Something took him apart from the inside. And the only link is her. His voice trembled when he said it. Because deep down, he knew she would strike again. The curse without end. 1 year later, in a dusty town near the border, a tourist snapped a photo of graffiti on a crumbling wall. A skeletal figure cradling a swollen belly, red eyes burning in empty sockets. Underneath, the words dripped in paint. La Madre Nunca de Vida. Solo Toma. The mother never gives life. She only takes. The photo went viral. To some, it was proof of the cult's survival. To others, it was a warning. But to those who knew Ethan's story, it was a promise. Because Isabella Reyes had become more than a woman. She had become a shadow, a curse, a myth too strong to kill. The final warning. So where is she now? Maybe in a neon-lit bar, sipping soda water with lime, her swollen belly resting beneath folded hands. Maybe in a desert chapel lit with black candles. Maybe walking down a motel hallway, eyes calm, steady, fixed on her next victim. Because if the whispers are true, Ethan Cross was not the first, and he will never, ever be the last. So remember this. If you see her, if you meet a woman 7 months pregnant, alone, steady, with eyes too calm to be human, don't stay, don't follow, don't even look back. Because once she chooses you, there is no escape.